Okay. Well, welcome to North Country Bookmarks. I'm Jessica Lawrence, and I'm super excited to be joined by our friends at WAER, Joe Lee. He's the station manager. I'm very honored to have him as a guest. And obviously, we have the biggest guest, and that would be Dana Spiotta, who is the author of Wayward, which is the book we're going to be talking about today. If you have any questions, feel free to share them in the chat, and we will hopefully be able to get the answers however we can. So thanks so much for joining us, both Joe and Dana. It's so great to see you guys.
Thank you, Jessica.
And thanks for putting this together and reaching out. This was a really great idea.
Yeah, I'm excited. Love the collaboration we're able to do. So Dana, this isn't your first book. It isn't even your second book. You have numerous accolades to your name and your penmanship. So I'm dying to know what inspired you to write this book.
I am at this point, I am always working on a book. And so I had walked by this house that's a big part of the novel. This woman likes to go to open houses, even though she has no intention of buying a house, and kind of imagine what it would be like to live in the house. And I think a lot of people have that hobby. And she goes into this house, and it's this. And so when I was walking by this house, I had this idea that a woman would fall in love with this falling down, beautiful house, and it would be very inexpensive, which is possible in Syracuse. And she would agree to buy it and not realize till she was driving home that this meant she was going to leave her husband and blow up her life. And so that was my starting point. And then
that all came to you just seeing
from
that
a walk?
Because I walk by it every day.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's that graveyard right there that looks like a park. And it just seemed so interesting, that kind of the work of imagination you do when you see a house that you're interested in that captures your. So, and I just thought, okay, so maybe she's having a kind of midlife crisis, but I was very clear that I didn't want it to be about a bad marriage and she's going to have an affair. And I wanted her to kind of have a good life and just be, and part of the work of the novel is trying to figure out why she did this dramatic thing, right? And there's all these different possibilities, but a big part of it is the election. She's very on edge as many people were, after the 2016 election. And she feels implicated in the state of things. And then in her personal life, her mother is dying and her daughter is going soon to be off to college. And she feels very ill prepared for the second half of her life, like what she's going to do with herself. So I think she needs the house. And I didn't know all that starting out. I just had the idea of the house, but you kind of follow the voice once you get the voice, and the voice kind of tells you who they are. And she's, she's very self-critical. She's got a little bit of self-loathing, I would say, even, but she's also kind of funny, and she's trying to be honest about herself, which is a hard thing to do particularly when you're middle-aged, because you're very invested in all the status quo of your life, right? So,
right.
And her hust's not happy about this and doesn't understand it. And her daughter's really not happy about it. So her daughter, it estranges her from her daughter. Her daughter stops talking to her. So that's another. So things the consequence of that one thing just leads you into the plot, really. Yeah.
And her name is Samantha. You call her Sam in the book. And you said you didn't want to have this, have her be a cliche. You didn't want her husband leaving her for a younger woman and just a miserable marriage. But you do describe her in this marriage as feeling somewhat neglected and describing really two people that are just coexisting. There's no real intimacy, no real marriage the way we would normally think of a healthy marriage. So there is a sort of a detachment going on there.
Yes. I mean, I think she feels detached from her life, and part of that is certainly her marriage, that she feels that they're kind of in a rut. There's a big flashback, right, where she remembers when they were younger and they were more engaged in the world, and they're now kind of this bourgeois suburban life that they're living, and she's doesn't, she doesn't like the clothes in her closet. She doesn't want to, she doesn't want to do that anymore. And so she doesn't know what she wants to do, but she knows she doesn't want that. So that, yeah. And I think that's, so there's a lot of things contributing to it, but a big part of it also is that she's got these menopausal symptoms and she can't sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So she's a little deranged from insomnia too. So that I think is making her, and I shouldn't say deranged sounds so negative, but I mean that she's closer to the edge and more emotionally unbridled than she would otherwise be. And I think that doesn't mean that the feelings you have aren't true. It just means you have a harder time suppressing them, maybe,
I'm not gonna lie. Reading this book as a man, my wife is going through menopause. This book scared the bejesus out of me.
Well, not all people get those symptoms. I was shocked though. That was another thing that inspired the book too, is that I had heard about hot flashes, but I didn't realize that this insomnia and brain fog and stuff, other things could happen. And I remember talking to some older women and saying, wait a minute, what? And they said, yeah, this can go on for years. And I thought, why aren't people talking about this more? So I thought, I want to write about menopause and not be ashamed of it. Just talk about it, or the menopausal symptoms, and talk about the body. And I think one of the things about menopause is it really makes it, you can't avoid, it's so dramatic. You can't avoid the fact that you're aging. You can't avoid the fact that your body's aging. I mean, you can go to the gym and you can do whatever you want, but the fact is you've hit a line and you're going to be on the other side of the line. And it means that your life is going in one direction, which is true for everybody, but it just feels harder to ignore.
Right. Well, you brought up a good point about Sam and, being emotional, but there's a point in the book where she talks about how she's always been a very emotional person, how she cries very easily and she gets enraged. And so that sort of segues into our discussion of the 2016 election. And that really was something that was very central to her story. It was really hard for her. She took it really hard. A lot of people did. What did you want readers to take away from including the election into the story?
I think it was an interesting, so clearly, America has had all of these problems for a really long time, forever, right? And so I think the election put it in this place where people had to sort of confront it, maybe, who hadn't had, and she is a woman with a lot of privilege, she knows there's inequity, she knows there's racism, she knows there's misogyny. I mean, she does, but it was really, she was ignorant but not innocent is how she puts it. And so I think she feels a little ashamed, a little bit angry at herself that she's kind of blithely living her life. And then all of a sudden, the world is in shambles, but of course it is in shambles. I mean, and that's why I think the move from the suburbs to the city is important, because when you're in the city, you can't hide from the inequity. You can't hide from the segregation. You can't hide from the reality of, like, maybe your the comfort of your life is at a cost to somebody else. And so she is very morally, she wants to be good. She doesn't just want to be, she's trying to figure out how to be in the world without, with integrity, I think. And it's a challenge for many of us. And I related to that part of it too. And I think with a daughter, you think, okay, and Me Too brought this up as well. So while I'm writing the book, Me Too happens. And I was thinking, wow, we haven't made enough progress since second wave feminism, which was changed so much when I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s. We had, free to be you and me. I mean, it was just like this kind of great change in what it meant to be a woman. All the possibilities were there. And then I'm thinking, did we do much after that? Because why is it still so bad? And why did we put up with so many things? And so I think she feels, again, implicated in that. And so I think the irony is that her daughter ends up, of course, having a secret of her own and her own rebellion, which would, that her mother doesn't know about. And that's one of the tensions of the book, is what is going on with the almost 17-year-old daughter who's having this very inappropriate affair secretly. and that and I think part of it too is the parenting thing of being an overbearing parent, as Sam is. As you say, she's emotional. She's been kind of smothering her daughter, trying to control her daughter too much. So one of the things I think is the crisis here is you can't control your body, right? Menopause is going to come for you no matter what. And you can't control your kids. They're growing up and they're going, into the world. And as it turns out, I think, I'm not spoiler alert or anything, but I think, Allie's going to be herself and she's going to be okay. But it's a dangerous time, right? To be that young and to have, think that you know about the world when you have very little experience, right? And she can't really protect her.
And for those tuning in that haven't read the book, Allie is her 16, 17-year-old daughter.
Right. Who's seems very different and wants to be very different from her mother. But I think part of what in the book, it becomes clear that they're not that different from each other.
Right. They're super similar. And I found that to be very true. And I'm thinking as I was reading it, is this what I'm in for? Because I have a 10-year-old daughter who is just like me now. So is this the path that I'm like seeing my future now? Scary, but true.
Well, eventually they will return to you. They just have to go away and be on their own, right? Yeah.
Right. So going in, we talked about you walking past the house and that sort of spawned the idea. Did you know you wanted to have both Sam and Allie telling the story from their perspective?
That's a good question. I thought it would just be Sam, but her voice is a lot. She's, as my daughters would say, she's extra. So I thought it would be at a certain point, I thought, well, we should hear from the daughter's perspective. So actually in the book, there are some scenes, important, pivotal scenes that you see from mom's perspective and then you see from Allie's perspective that they remember. And it kind of gives you the sense of distance between them and also the overlap, the little Venn diagram of what really happened between them. But so by kind of alternating between the two of them, I thought it would give you a chance to see how other people perceive Sam and also give you this great kind of, I hope, a little exciting narrative with Allie, what's going to happen to Allie. And so switching back and forth in a novel, it's kind of gives you a little bit of momentum, a little bit of suspense when you have two different storylines. You wonder when they're going to come and overlap or when they're going to get resolved. So one of the things, I think that Sam really wants, aside from figuring out her life, is she wants to have a relationship with her daughter. She wants her daughter to answer her texts. So she texts her every day, one text, only allows herself one text, and Allie does not respond, but she reads them. She has her read receipts on and she reads them. But and so it's interesting. I thought it'd be interesting. And then of course there's the mother, Allie's grandmother, Sam's mother, who we find out is dying, and we find out right away that she's dying, but we don't find out the full story of it. And so that so then I think the question sort of becomes, in the second half of the book, very kind of different. It moves from more satire in the beginning and setting up all these conflicts. And then it really changes a lot, I think, in the second half. The tone of it becomes a little bit more emotional, I think, as we get closer to the end.
I've read a lot of the reviews, which are all glowing. It's getting just rave reviews. But I read the description from these writers about the metaphor of the house, right. And I want to hear from you. What does that house represent?
Yeah. So when I was writing it, it was really just thinking of it as a house. And I didn't know that Sam, I do like to write characters that are kind of obsessive because it's interesting to me. So she's got this she's not trained or educated to be an architect, but she loves old buildings. So she has this habit of looking at old buildings and thinking about them and trying to imagine what, and describing them. And that comes up later in the book too. There's a whole catalog of that. But so I think that kind of exploring the house was a way to explore the character, that she would really wonder about everything. She goes and looks up the contracts that Ward Wellington Ward made with the artisans. And, she really there's a sense, she has a very physical relationship with the house, right? And an emotional relationship to the house and feels attached to it the way you would to like a lover, I
Mhm.
think. But I think but now since the book, as I was writing the book and now that I get feedback from people, what I think is that she says the house spoke to her because she alone could see its beauty. And I do think there's something metaphorical in this idea of something that's kind of falling apart. It's still beautiful, but it's kind of a wreck. But if you look at it, you can find the beauty in it,
Mhm.
right? So maybe that's sort of what she's doing with her life, right? And I do think a city is like that too. I think that you have this relationship to the past, whether you ignore it or not, right? The past
Mhm.
exists and shapes everything about Syracuse. When they put 81 in and you ripped out neighborhoods,
Mhm.
that changed what it was like to live here, changed the character of the city. So you can pave it over, you can do these things, but you can't ignore the history. And
Right.
that also, I think, ties the election too, that you cannot ignore the real fact of how we got here. And that's the only way to go forward, is to understand how you got there.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's true with the house and the city and with the lives of the characters too. So it all did kind of connect for me in that way. But also the house gives her something to take care of.
Yeah.
When her daughter doesn't need it
Right.
anymore.
And love.
Something to love.
When others aren't receiving the love she wants to give, she
Yes.
can give it to this house.
See, this is so smart too, because she has a lot of love to give.
Yeah.
She does.
Right.
But you ruined my next question on the city, because the city does there's a metaphor there too for a city that is Syracuse is seen as a city that is grappling with redefining itself, and having new growth, and I see that in her as well. I wanted to mention the writing this as taking place in Syracuse. So this book is phenomenal, and it's going to be read by people all over the country and world. It seems like an extra treat for people that live in Syracuse to read this book, because there's so much. There's the references are just they're just really cool. So we talk about the house on Highland Street. You can look out of the windows and see the kidney shape of Onondaga Lake. You can see out of one window SU up on the hill, and you can locate that by spotting the Carrier Dome.
Right.
The infamous Syracuse March snow dump that we all love. Shopping sales at Talbot's in DeWitt. I mean, this is like I'm reading this and I'm like, this is where I live. I mean, it's really cool. So I think it's going to be an extra treat for people from Syracuse to read this book.
Well, yeah, and I hope you're right. And it is a love letter, but it's definitely warts and all kind of portrait of Syracuse, right? Because Syracuse is what's interesting about Syracuse to me is when I was writing it, I was thinking, geez, does anybody really want the Syracuse novel? And I was, I don't care, because I'm writing it anyway, because you have to be specific, right? And I do think Syracuse, after the election, everybody was like, oh, we shouldn't think just about New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles. Like, there's a whole bunch of other places. And Syracuse as this kind of, Rust Belt type city where economic activity has kind of, the great prosperity in the past. And, although now, according to the census, our population is finally growing again. But that feeling of many cities of this size in upstate New York and in the Rust Belt area, and across the country, that have that feeling of, that prosperity has left them behind in some ways. And yet, I think that's where these interesting paradoxes you can find that are in a microcosm that it would be harder to grapple with in New York City or Los Angeles, these much more huger, much more thought about cities. And so Syracuse does have incredible beauty. I mean, that it's in a valley, that it has a lake, that it has these beautiful parks. And it has it has this great history. It's the abolition movement, it has the women's movement, it has the Erie Canal. And when I moved to Syracuse, I moved here 11 years ago, so I'm kind of an outsider, right? And so you can see kind of, in a way, more than a native, because you're sort of like, what's this? What's this? And I was so shocked when Erie Boulevard, I was like, the Erie Canal used to be here,
right?
And now it's like big box stores.
Right.
So there's some really sad things about that, although the Erie Canal was probably really smelly and stagnant water. Anyway, it had its own issues, no doubt. But so I thought it's just a fascinating place because it has so much contradiction in it, and I do love it. I think it is really. I feel it's a very unpretentious place, and everyone is. Yeah, I mean, it's a good place. Yeah.
We talked a little bit about 110 Highland Street, which is a real house. I did do my research and look it up, and yet it's not at all like how I pictured it to be. So can you give us a little history on that house itself?
Okay, so there are a lot of things in the book that are real, but because it's fiction, I do take my liberties with it, and people. There's John Humphrey Noyes, the head of Oneida, is in my book, but he never said those things. He's a fictional character for my book. So that house in particular, I was never able to go inside it because it's all boarded up and it is much more falling apart. So I have been in a number of other Wellington Ward houses. So I kind of cobbled together what I imagined it would be like to be in that house from those houses. And so but I definitely took liberties. It definitely is fiction. So that'll be, but there were some things I didn't want to make not accurate. Like you can't have two streets not cross. I mean, there's some limits. It gives you a nice constraint. You're like, it's going to be in the city. It's going to have the rules of this specific city, but I'm going to have also some fictional embroidery that I'm doing as well for the purposes of the book, right? Or drama, right?
Tell me about. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go, Joe.
One of the characters that I find fascinating is MH. So after the disappointment of the election, Sam starts, getting into what folks know as resistors, the whole resistor movement, and starts getting into some of these social media groups, Facebook groups, and meets a lot of the way that you describe some of these folks. This clandestine operation is pretty interesting. But there's this character MH that I find fascinating. Tell us about MH and how you created this character.
So she goes to a resistance meeting in a sort of between Syracuse and Skinny Atlas, and she doesn't relate, and then she kind of gets onto these Facebook groups, and she's kind of a lurker, and then she finds one person that she likes her energy because she's kind of abrasive and aggressive, and that leads her to this in real life group, which is completely imaginary, in Syracuse, the Harpies, Harridans, Harpies, Harridans, and Hags, Harpies, and Harridans. Yes. And they're middle-aged women who are embracing sort of not getting plastic surgery, but also just, in your face, not gonna be invisible. And they do this thing, and they have the MH does this thing where she does stand up. Mm-hmm. Goes to which
I was gonna that. That's a great scene.
It really is.
The reason that she gets up there is not to be a comedian. It's to sort of control her narrative.
Yes, to be seen
and to be seen and heard. And I just find that just fascinating. But I also get a chuckle out of the comedy club in the mall because everybody makes fun of it.
It's pretty sad. So poor Dusty Mall doesn't get off the hook there. But so she does this. So MH is this very charismatic 60-year-old woman, and there's something about her maybe that seems like doesn't quite add up. She says she likes being grotesque, but she's kind of glamorous. She has like expensive motorcycle boots, and maybe she has some tinted contact lenses, and so she's there's a few characters in the book that are kind of a little bit not what they seem, and I think Joe, the developer that Allie's having an affair with, he's kind of like that too, and John Humphrey Noyes and Oneida is, there's a lot of sort of I don't want to say sketchy, but people that may not be what they seem, right? And she so wants to have the energy of that refusal and that confidence that I think she misses some of the red flags, maybe.
Mhm.
With just like I think Allie misses them with Joe until
Right.
she can't miss them anymore, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I every time I'm going to say Joe, I feel like I need to preface it by
Sorry.
saying I'm not talking to Joe that's next to you. But speaking of Joe, he has a pretty big job. And one of them is, bringing everyone to Hotel Syracuse, which you obviously don't name as Hotel Syracuse in the book.
Right.
But we know it's Hotel.
I cleverly, I think, call it. I just said it's instead of saying it's a Marriott property, I call it like a Hyatt property.
Right.
So I really disguised it. Yeah.
Very loose. Right. Now, but the way you describe it, and especially in that particular scene, for people who have yet to read the book, it's so in detail and in depth and literally exactly like how it is when you walk into Hotel Syracuse. So you sold that, and I'm dying to know, did you go in and take pictures and that sort of spawned you writing, or did you sit there and write?
No, I definitely go, all the places I read about, I went to many times. I took many pictures of, and so, do you remember with when they uncovered that beautiful but controversial mural, right?
Mhm.
So that I remember I had gone to that hotel renovation right when it first opened, and I remember seeing that, and I was like, and then so that went in the book. That was just interesting to me. So as I was writing the book, I just kept noticing and paying attention to everything that was, and then once I got the idea that I was going to be looking for beautiful abandoned buildings, then they all just appeared. And, everything from the beautiful Carnegie Library that's just sitting there empty. I mean, just Montgomery Street alone, you could get,
Right.
And then that when you're on 81 and you're driving and you can see the old gates to the cemetery.
Mhm.
So I think all cities have this, especially cities, as we've described, that have had, where economic activity has kind of moved on and things are sitting there and they're sort of preserved by poverty, and it would be great if they were turned into something else. But Terrible Joe, he did a good job on the hotel, but he is kind of, turning it into, apartments for tech bros,
Mhm.
and getting a lot of tax breaks for it. And I mean, I'm sure that all of us in upstate know how that works, that happens. And sometimes there's beautiful renovations and things are repurposed in a wonderful way that is equitable. And other times they're just kind of, lofts for lawyers that, and we, maybe not to the benefit of all. Yeah. And maybe not beautiful.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Even Allie
Or
starts to
appropriate.
realize that.
Yeah.
Allie at 17 is pretty perceptive. And when she's at the Hotel Syracuse with Joe and she's listening to him talking and sort of giving his spiel, I think you can kind of read and see the wheels turning in her mind to say, like, I've had this guy way up on a pedestal and he does not belong there, with the tax breaks and things like that. So even at 17, she's remarkably similar to her mom, where she starts to see things, not as golden, take the rose-colored glasses off and see what it's really like. And I thought that was so refreshing and real. And it's, again, not giving anything away, but I can remember being 17 and thinking I knew what love was. And she really does. And and I want to like shake the book as it was pretending it's her and be like, but no, you don't, this is not the path you want to go down. And yet I think it's important to read.
Well, I remember being that age too, and your brain is as good as it's going to get, right? You're smart. And, but you have no experience, and that really is dangerous.
Mhm.
And I think, and then you have the impulse to want to show your parents that you're your own person.
Right.
And all of that can be really combustible. And so I think she's, but she does figure it out. She has, I think and she wants to be different from her mom, and she is in a lot of ways. She's much better at controlling her emotions than her mother is. And she's really good at keeping secrets. I think Sam would be terrible at keeping secrets.
Mhm. Well, she'd spill them in the middle of a night wake.
Right. Right. And also in a monologue. I mean, one of the things when she gets her chance to do her monologue, she just starts talking about her, personal stuff with her daughter, which you don't do.
Right. Not in public either.
No, and not in public. Yes. Yeah.
You talked about, presenting Syracuse with its beauty and its warts. You invoke names like Bill Fitzpatrick, citizens review boards, a little bit of injustice. Talk about that a little bit and what you were trying to get at there.
Well, I think one of the, I was going to some, I have a lot of interest in social justice and going to rallies and trying to, make the city more equitable. And the Citizen Review Board seemed like a great idea. And some of the people I've met who are on this Citizens Review Board or involved with those things, and talking to them. And it's amazing how many committed activists there are in Syracuse doing really great work. So I was kind of inspired by that too. I think there's a lot of hope in how much the people that, do care about those issues. And yeah, maybe I'll get in trouble for saying this, but I think Fitzpatrick not so good on those things. and the fact that it's very hard to get, what I realized about a small city is it's the people who are entrenched in power are hard to change because it's so much easier to consolidate your power when you're in a small city and you've been there for a decade. All of a sudden it's just impossible.
Very well connected and highly influential. Yeah. Very, very tough to make change.
Yeah. And I think when you think about what just happened with the governor, I think you can see that having a lot of power just kind of makes it less democratic ultimately, because you can't really get rid of that person until they do something that forces it. So that intrigued me about Syracuse too, just that it does seem like a lot of generations of people that are in the police force or that live in certain parts of town, and there's like an entrenched establishment in the Democratic Party. Okay, yeah, all of these things are the intrigue, which I think is probably the same in Albany, and it's the same in Buffalo, and it's the same in Watertown. It's got to, that's kind of how small cities operate, and it's not a book about that, but I think it's part of the story, right, of the city.
Yeah.
I know we touched a little bit on Lily, but I want to just read a quick passage that really stood out to me as a mom, but also I just thought it was beautifully written. At first, it was physical, the need to hold and to feed and to comfort. That was the best part of being a mother, answering that need. It was so simple and complete. And just reading that, as a mom, it was certainly, it's how I felt. And, like I mentioned with my daughter getting older, I'm wanting to know a little bit more about Lily and why you thought that Lily as a character was really important to bring in.
I think, one of the things about having a kid is that it makes you, I think, understand your mother and father more, because they must have felt that way about you, or had some similar impulses. And you really realize how imbalanced it is, right? It's sort of your job to kind of, as a child, to grow up and grow away. And then, and these people that, brought you into the world have a different view of you. And you can't really understand it until you have kids or have, a relationship with kids that even if they're not your kids, that's like that. And so I think she feels more attached to her mother, and losing her mother, it seems she's not prepared for this. She's lost her father, but losing her mother. And so I think she realized what I think that makes her realize. And I think that's a lot of what the second part of the book is about, is that we do have to imagine the world without our mothers, and we have to imagine the world without ourselves, right? And I think that's another reason why the house is important, because the house was there before Sam, and the house will outlive Sam. And I think it's okay that the world will be there without you. And that's part of your job, I think, as you age, is to sort of understand that. And I'm very close to my mother, and she's got a great kind of, when I ask her about aging, she talks about it in this way that just seems so much more poised. And I think, like, how do I get there from where it feels so dire and intense, where you're kind of accepting it? And I mean, and that's the job of everybody, is to get to the point where, if you're lucky enough to have a long arc of your life, that when you get to the end of it, you're sort of ready. You sort of accept it, because these are the terms. There's no negotiating them. Right. And so I think she's frightened that she really realizes that the first half of your life, which you're still very much in with your 10-year-old, it feels so easy. It wasn't hard to be happy, even though there's hard things in it. But when you get to that second part of your life and you realize you're losing your aunts and your uncles and your parents, and then that's going to be you and your friends, that's not as much fun as the first half. Yeah. It's harder. And so you've got to be starting to take that in and accept it. And I think that she's brave to do that, because I think there's a lot of things in the world that are designed to distract you from that. Just get some plastic surgery and, get a new husband, and don't think about aging, just go shopping and just whatever, do whatever you need to do to not think about it and not worry about it, and I don't mean to be morbid, but I do think that that's partially what her, to make peace with that. That's kind of like almost a spiritual thing. And I think that's partially why we end up at Oneida in the second half of the book, is that girl who grows up to be this compromised activist, was at one time leaving her mother and going out into the world because she wanted a better life and she wanted her independence. And, Victorian society was very limiting, and it turned it out in more complicated. And so I think one of the things in the book is not just that. For me, fiction is really about asking questions and letting them be complicated, like not trying to say it's simple, it's obvious, it's clear. It's not. And maybe in fiction is a place where we can kind of let things be contradictory and have a paradox within them, and just kind of look at it, rather than saying I have the answer,
If I could step away from the book and the story for just a second and talk about your creative process. There's probably some folks who are listening in that are writers or budding writers. Talk about your creative process and how, with your earlier work, were you able to push through? Because like I said, if I Google your name, all the reviews, and there are many of them for this book, will pop up. But at some point you had to push through all of the noise out there to get noticed.
Well, I will say, I teach in the creative writing program at SU, which is a great program. And I'm certainly happy to answer any process questions if people have them, because I do love teaching. And I would just say that so much of it is luck, to be honest with you. You can writing a good book is all about work and devotion. And it's crazy because it takes 5 years. So, it's a big part of your life. That's my affair. She has her house. Me, it's the book, right? There's always a secret life going on that I'm feeding every day. And it kind of keeps me, at this point, it's the only way I know how to be. I start getting depressed if I don't do it. It's a way of thinking about the world and working it out, or answering back. So, crazy stuff happens, and I've been on Twitter too much, whatever, and I just need to go write and kind of find a way to process it through characters and stories. And that's the kind of writing I do. But then when you have this thing, no matter how good it is, and you put it out into the world, it's so hard to get attention. There's so many books, and there's so many, and plus books are already kind of a small niche part of the culture, right? So there is a little bit of luck involved in getting it, not in making it, that's all up to you, but in getting it to readers is really hard, I think, because there's a lot of things going on. And I think the pandemic did bring a lot of people to reading again. And I think that's great, because to me, it's the opposite of being on the internet for a long time. Because when you're on the internet a lot, which I am a lot, you're engaging in a specific kind of way that's frankly, pretty shallow, right? It's just kind of, and it's quick, and it's jumping around, and it's a little, it's a lot of data and personalities and misreadings, and nobody is revising what they're putting up on Twitter or Facebook. It's just fast, right? And novels for me as a reader are just, you're spending a long time, maybe days, hours, with one person's take on something, and it's so interactive because you're not clicking it through it, but you're putting it down and thinking about it related to your own life. So for me, reading is very interactive as a reader, and clearly as a writer, it feels that way. And that kind of connection, that long, deep, focused attention, it's hard to come by, culturally. And I think people forget how much they need it. And if you haven't read a book in a long time and then you get into one, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot I need that in my life because it's a break from this, and I see my daughter and I was like, it's the purgatory of getting in a book is harder now. Like you kind of like keep putting it down and looking at the internet, look up something about it. But once you're in, if you get hooked, then you forget how great it is. It's as good as binge watching a Netflix show.
Yeah, this I have to say, doing a little research on it, this was the first time. This ain't gonna say much about me because I'm into science fiction and fantasy. But
cool.
This was the first time I had heard the term coming of middle age story. Is there a lot of work out there with that theme?
I think there is. In terms of fiction, there is a lot of middle-age crisis stories, maybe more men than women, but I think there are a lot of women. But I think the reason why I think people are commenting on this, I hope, is maybe because it's also not just about that, but it has a little bit broader cultural reach. So it feels, maybe America's going through yet another midlife crisis. Maybe this is, and I think sometimes in fiction you can talk very locally about some very specific person who's eccentric and in a specific place, but ideally it would feel like it would reach beyond that, because you sort of, all you need to do is recognize, oh, that's a human, right? Do I believe that's a human? And then it's interesting, I hope. And so for me, I'm not afraid to make my characters eccentric, because I think we are all eccentric, right? We are all kind of weird inside in our own way. So I hope people read it and go, oh, I feel that way too, but I haven't read it like that. And you feel less alone. You feel kind of some connection. And that, to me, that's what I like about reading, is just feeling less alone. I don't need you to tell me all the answers, but just connect with me, And so I think that's it. But yeah, the coming of middle age, maybe it's because the baby boomers are now, maybe Gen X is coming of middle age, and that's the new thing. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
And then the millennials will have their own coming of middle age.
So we were talking about Syracuse. I'm sort of piggybacking off of what Joe said. You mentioned doing a lot of research, walking around, taking pictures. Did you yourself learn a lot about Syracuse when you were writing the book?
Yes. Oh, yes. And no doubt I've gotten some things wrong, but I did have a lot of help, which you'll see in the acknowledgements. Some professors at SU that helped me, and some local activists that have helped me. And there's a great Instagram that David Haas has, a Syracuse history Instagram, which is really, he's amazing. And this Sam Gruber, who's the head of the Arts and Crafts Society, I went on a lot of his walks where he talks about architecture, and he has a great blog. So I talked to a lot of people who know about Syracuse, and then when I wrote the book and finished it, I gave it to some people to read, who, what did I get wrong? And because you don't want to get things wrong unless you're deliberately doing something, because the credibility goes away. So I had to get a lot of help, and I did learn a lot about Syracuse, and I'm still learning about Syracuse.
Sure.
It's interesting. Yeah. And upstate New York. I mean, I've written about a lot of, I've written about more of the Mohawk Valley when I was living over there. I wrote about that a lot. And now maybe I'll start going west. I'll have to write about Buffalo next or something.
Now, is that because you were here and comfortable, you knew enough to dive in, or was there another why as to why Syracuse?
Well, I mean, I think because Syracuse, I did do, I did a trip on the Erie Canal a few years ago for the New York Times Magazine. I wrote about it as a journalist. I don't do much journalism, but it was like personal history thing. And that got me interested in the Erie Canal. And so then, I started going to the Erie Canal Museum here and the Historical Association. And that kind of, from there, I kind of got obsessed with the whole central New York and upstate New York. But I moved around a lot when I was growing up. We moved maybe 8 times. And then as an adult, I moved a lot. And so what that means is that I don't really feel like I'm at home anywhere, but I feel also that I am home everywhere. So if I were to get a job in Nashville tomorrow, I'd probably just be like, oh, this is so interesting, Nashville, because I do believe almost anything, if you look closely at it, it will reveal itself and it will be interesting. And I think that's true of people too. I think people are so fascinating if you just look at them without cliches and without stereotypes, and you just listen to them talk about their lives and give you specifics of their lives, you start to put it together and it's kind of beautiful, just the story that a place has or a person has. So I like doing that. That's the best part about being a writer, I think.
You don't get specific about the suburban area
no,
but I'm guessing it's Fayetteville.
That's right.
Okay.
You're talking about Talbots and
Definitely
Wegmans,
yeah.
And I'm like, that's my neighborhood. And now when I walk my dog, I'm gonna start looking at people side-eyed, like, who's gonna be the next Sam in this true. Neighborhood?
I mean, Fayetteville's so beautiful. And of course, there's the library there is the old Stickley factory, and that is also interesting. The whole Craftsman Stickley history of Syracuse too. That, and so many of the houses in Syracuse come from that era that are so beautiful. So yeah, I definitely have a little bit of Sam's obsessions with architecture for sure. But as an autodidact, I just like it. Yeah.
So Clara Loomis is a fictional character, and she says something really important. After children, she started her true life. How much of an influence do you think Clara Loomis played in Sam's decision or need for change?
Well, that's a good question, because she never says it. She never says, oh, just like Clara Loomis, I need to change, but that's definitely true. That's good. Yeah, interesting. I mean, and then I think Sam kind of misses the boat on Clara. She respects her, but she doesn't really like the house which was inspired by the Jocelyn Gage house on the way to Fayetteville. But Jocelyn, she's Matilda Jocelyn Gage is a great activist, feminist. So my character is much more flawed. She gets into some really sketchy stuff, but I think everyone has an opinion about her, and so I thought even Sam doesn't really see her accurately, and then we get a little glimpse of her, and that she at one time was more idealistic and less compromised, and also just a kid, and so it's interesting that you say that. I think the book makes that connection, and obviously for you as a reader, but I don't think Sam is conscious of that. That's smart though.
Thank you. That's one thing that I really love. I don't know. I mean, Joe read the book. I read the book. A lot of people have read the book. And part of the reason why I love reading so much, sort of going back to what you said, I love reading a book and then having a conversation with someone who also read the book, because I love that we take different things. I think that's so important, and to talk about it, because I know Joe got things out of it that I didn't get. And, I'm hoping it's vice versa. So that's what's fun to me about having a conversation, especially about this book. I knew that she had to have been related loosely to someone, Clara Loomis, and all I could think of was, I know there is a house on the way to Fayetteville.
So you did.
And I couldn't for the life of me think of the name. So thank you for saying
the Gage house. Yeah. And I feel bad because we kind of make fun of the house a little bit in the book, but what are you going to do? It is a little podunk. It's kind of sweet though.
I want to give the participants a chance. If you have a question for Dana, feel free to throw it in the chat and I'll be able to ask that we have about 10 minutes left. So Joe, do you have another question?
No, I mean, I want to piggyback on what you talked about different perspectives, because what I like about these chats is I always think I understand what the author is trying to convey. And so having this kind of discussion will either confirm that or I'm way off. You know, it's like, what?
But don't you think, I mean, I learn a lot about my books from having conversations like book clubs or interviews or just readers who have written me, because sometimes when you're writing, you're so into it that your subconscious is connecting things. It becomes, you believe in this world. And sometimes you're not aware of connections. And that doesn't mean they're not there. I think that's really kind of amazing, you know? But sometimes people say stuff and I'm like, no. Mm-hmm. but a lot of times I'm like, oh yeah, that's true.
And to personalize it a little bit, you give me, whether it's, true or not, or accurate or not, you give me some insight into, things that we witness all the time. People in my circle, I've had at least 3 people in my circle over the last 20 years or so, where someone has woken up and said, I don't love you anymore, and has left. And I've always wondered, how does that, because I've been married for, 30 years. And so I'm wondering, how does that happen, and what's going on in that life? And so this gives me a little window into, even though it's fictional, it gives me a little window into that kind of thing.
That's great. And I think one of the things that there's that moment where she's in the house the first night and she wakes up from her insomnia. And I think, she realizes she can turn on the light. She can make dinner. She can go for a walk. She doesn't have to take care of anybody. She doesn't have to worry about anybody. And there is a liberation, she loses something, but maybe she gains something. So is it, that trade-off? And I think it's hard sometimes to wonder, I think people do wonder, what would my life be like if I changed it? And oftentimes in literature, men do this, but it's less common that women, because I think sometimes we judge women more for doing it because they're the caregivers and they're kind of like the keeper of and so I was kind of glad to have her do this thing that was a little bit perverse and maybe wayward, right? And just sort of see what happens.
It was definitely wayward because she, I think it was the way you laid it out. She didn't really consider how this was going to impact Allie. Right?
Yeah.
And so that was interesting to watch, to sort of read and watch her try to grapple with the after effects of that.
Yeah, the consequences, and that's where drama comes from, right? And also she's kind of just kind of flies by in the book, but Allie immediately thinks they're getting divorced, that the dad must be leaving the mom, right? Which is so insulting in a way.
He is a schmuck, though. I mean, he's a bit of a schmuck. You painted him out to be a schmuck.
She's like, no, I'm doing it.
Yes.
I'm doing it.
Right. Thinking about how much of a schmuck he is, how he always seemed to think like, I can just throw money at her and that'll make her complacent and come back.
Right. Well, she does backslide quite a bit.
Yeah.
Right.
It's hard to give up your comfort and your safety. And she knows that she's being a hypocrite, and then she starts sleeping with him again too. So she knows that so I think, she's very flawed, but she is trying. I think she's trying in good faith, but it's not easy.
Would you hang out with Sam?
Oh, definitely. I would hang out with Sam. I would just, I don't know if I'd hang out with MH though.
Okay. Why not?
I would say, Sam, Allie's dating a much older guy now. And then watch her explode. I'm
going to piggyback off of what Joe said. So this is a very Syracuse question. Uh-oh. You're hanging out with Sam, right? Where do you take Sam to get drinks or dinner?
I thought you were going to ask me about the New York State Fair, since that's starting soon.
That's true too. Maybe you go to the fair.
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I like Salt City Market. I think it's really cool. Yeah. And that's probably where a lot of these women would hang out. But I will say, to get back to researching Syracuse, when I went to as I say in the acknowledgments, all those T-shirts that I describe in the book are all real. As is the butter sculpture of the cops with the cow. I don't know if you guys remember. I don't know if you saw this, but I was like, whoa. Yeah. So there's some stuff that seems like it would be imaginary, but it's real.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The fair scene, though, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of my favorite scenes, and especially reading it from both the mother's perspective and the daughter's perspective. I mean, in that scene in particular, I felt like Allie was 17. You know, that was so 17. Her idea of, I want to go in public with this guy I'm dating, and
Right.
why does it have to be such a big deal?
Right.
And why wouldn't you go?
Car.
Right. Right. Like, why wouldn't you go to the fair? Right. And as soon as she's saying this in the book, I'm like, this is not going to end well for her. I don't see this going down a good path. And how hard it must have been for Sam to literally look the other way. I don't know that I would be able to stop myself from not saying something.
But I think because of so much of what the more serious things that she's engaged with at that moment, I think she's just kind of, and she's also at that point in the book, she's almost having a breakdown. She's had, she hasn't slept. She's just really at the edge. Yeah,
for sure.
And we don't want to give away, but yeah, some dramatic things happen. Yeah,
absolutely. Joe, do you have any final questions?
No, I don't. It's just I am not completely done, so please don't spoil anything for me.
Don't worry about that.
And I do want to encourage folks to get a copy. I know that we've partnered with the Syracuse University campus store, and we have some other stores.
The St. Lawrence University Brewer Bookstore also bought copies, so people could go there and buy them. And
of course, you can get it wherever you download digital books, right?
Yes, absolutely. You can get it on Audible, and you can get it on what is that called? Kindle, right?
Okay, yeah.
But I will say that this is a pretty looking actual object. If you get the actual object, it has keys, and it has little keys on the side too. Did you see those?
I did. Through the horse, no less. I love it. Someone
said that first chapter kind of looks like a door to a house. See, that's another thing a reader told me that I didn't.
Oh.
Like, it's so little that you could just open it.
Well, also, I have to say, and Joe would agree with me, that we wouldn't be able to do things like this, like a North Country Bookmarks Live, without the support of people supporting WAER and NCPR. So we're obviously both member-driven stations. We rely on individual gifts and business support. So please feel free to donate to either or both station after this event, because that's how we keep our jobs, right, Joe?
That's right. You know, she's a development person.
She's right.
She's going to make the call to action right at the end.
You gotta do it. You gotta do it, right?
Public radio all the way.
You can support at WAER.org and
NCPR.org.
There you go.
Dana, thank you so much. It's been such a privilege and an honor for me to speak with you. And Joe, it's been so great to connect with our friends at WAER and partner together for North Country Bookmarks Live.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out and doing this mashup. It was fantastic. And Dana, thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Jessica. This is so great. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Have a great rest of your night.
Bye.